In this how-to video we will be showing you how to build our new 00 gauge kit, the Finsbury Park boiler house stroke stores room, and here we have a completed kit that we've done. We'll show you how to do this. This one was obviously a pre-production kit and there have been a few changes since, so I'll quickly go over and show you that. The main difference is the base. Now obviously this kit will have two options. It'll have a fully bricked internal kit pack option, or you can just go for a non-brick pack option. Ideally, if you want the internal bricks, you're going to go for the clear glazing. If you decide to go for the standard, you'll go for opaque glazing. Now on the pre-production model I had the internal brickwork clip into the base all the way around. Now obviously I've worked out that most probably that wouldn't be best if you want to remove the base, so on the production model you'll now see there are no notches, it's just the base. So we don't recommend that you glue your skeleton frame to the base unless you have no intentions of putting anything in it, then by all means do. If you're going to have the internal brickwork, then you're going to most probably want to release the base at some stage, and you won't be able to do it via the roof because there's too many roof cross members. So we need to make sure that you can access the base, hence why we've changed that. The only other main difference is on the windows. I've made the end bits slightly wider, and these show this one, and then obviously with the silver aluminium strip it should cover that nicely, and then you can obviously blend it in with your paint. So hopefully during the production, we recommend that you watch videos first before building it. It's entirely up to you though. Just make sure that you take care when building this. There's going to be a bit of sanding required on this because obviously it involves corners and different lengths of MDF and thicknesses, so we recommend doing this in a well ventilated area and use of appropriate mask if required. But otherwise enjoy the video. Any questions then don't hesitate to get in contact and we'll start the video build. Hello, I'm Steve from Railway Laser Lines, and this is the How to Build series continued, and this is the 00 gauge boiler house. And in front of you are some of the parts that come with this kit, and I'll quickly run through those with you. So obviously we have the base, we have the front skeleton frame, rear skeleton frame, and the two side skeleton frames. Externally then we've got the rear external brickwork, the front external brickwork, and the two side external brickwork. Then we have two front window frames because they will be sandwiched between glazing, two rear window frames sandwiched between glazing, and then two side window frames sandwiched between those two glazing. Now obviously some of these parts are going to need painting and priming. The only parts of the skeleton frame, obviously you're going to need to prime the inner side of this, and then most probably do it in a concrete colour, because we will be cladding the outside of the skeleton frame with the brickwork, and then there will also be some internal cladding which I'll show you in a moment. You don't need to prime or paint these apart from the doors, so they're engraved in, they don't open, so it's worth masking them up and painting these doors in the colour of your choice, and then put them to one side. The framework will need to be painted. Now this is our model board. You can most probably get away with just doing a matte black primer or matte black paint to cover it, and you'll need to do both sides, and obviously you've got two of those. You're gonna have to be very careful how you do these. These are really thin, and you're gonna have to do them at a distance or slowly so they don't blow away. You might be able to just do a bit of double-sided tape, and I would use Tamiya tape in the corners just to keep it intact while you're painting them. Once these both have been painted and dried, then obviously then you can glue them together, but you need to sandwich the glazing in between. If you want to keep the glazing opaque like it is now, leave the the backing on. There's a backing on both sides. If you want clear glass, peel the backing off. Now, because I'm going to do the premium internal, I will be taking my panels off, backing off, to reveal a clear glazing, but that's entirely up to you. So those are the main parts, and then I'll show you the internal parts. Now, the boiler house will come with two options for the inside: a standard kit or a premium brickwork kit. And obviously the brickwork, as you can see, there's a lot of brickwork here, and obviously the internal piece is double-sided brick. There's thousands of bricks that have been engraved, so this is going to be a more expensive interior. It's entirely up to you, but if you go for the standard, it will just be a plain piece of MDF with engraved doors and your roof framework. It won't have brickwork. So you've got the front internal framework, the rear internal framework, the side internal framework, the internal partition wall framework, and then you've got your cross members that go across at each individual frame. Now these are made out, and these will go on the inner side of the skeleton. So obviously these need to be primed and painted, just like the exterior brickwork. You'll need to prime the brickwork in a red oxide primer, and then you can go to town by doing different colors, whatever you want to do. Obviously the top external framework will need to be primed in most probably a grey, and obviously there is a small gap here on the real boiler house that was at Finsbury Park, which is what this is based on. It was a concrete lintel top, so I've left a gap there so we can do that as well. So we've got a lot to do, so I would suggest that you prime the base floor and prime these roof supports, prime these parts covering up your brickwork, or if you've got the standard one, you don't necessarily have to cover up the side piece, because you can paint that white, so you can blend it in if you want to, but entirely up to you. And I'm going to do the grey parts first. Once they're dry, obviously then you'll need to turn these over and replicate these on the other side. Once that's dry, then we can concentrate on doing either the standard walls in the colour of your choice, but probably white. In this case I'm using the premium interior. I'm going to got bricks, so I'm going to be doing a red oxide primer, and then I'll most probably play around with colours as well if I've got time. So there's plenty to get on with, so we're going to go and start doing some priming, then we'll come back and show you how we got on. So as you can see, all I've done is got a piece of wood, I've got a spare piece of 3mm MDF I've got lying around that I used to paint on, and I've masked up. So I've masked up the brickwork, and I've put these back to back so I can spray and hopefully not use too much primer. Covered up the paintwork. I've double-sided the masking tape here so it just sticks to the base, and that's ready to prime. Make sure you get that the right way round. I've got to cover up the brickwork here, but obviously that's masked as well. And then here on the roof joints, I've just double-sided the masking tape, and there's puncture on one side, so I'm ready to paint in those. So I can take this into the garage and do my grey primer, allow that to dry, and then literally repeat the other side. Obviously the base, you don't need to paint the bottom. You can if you want to. MDF works better if it's primed, but I tend to find when I've done my kits, I use a black acrylic paint underneath just to give it added protection, because obviously I'm going to build this and it won't be glued down. So I'm going to do that at another later stage. So let's go into the garage and do some grey primer. While we're waiting for the grey primer to dry, we can keep ourselves occupied and move on to the window frameworks. And I've used some Tamiya masking tape. Now please do not use normal masking tape on these. It will tear off the model board and it will ruin it. So either do these without any masking at all, and hopefully they don't blow away. But Tamiya masking tape is superb. We won't need to worry about that, and it's only on the corners. So I can matte prime these in a black primer, and I've done the other windows on a smaller piece as well. Take those into the garage and prime, allow them to dry thoroughly, and then remove carefully, redo your masking tape, and then put the other sides on and do the other side, allow that to dry, fully before we even attempt to add the glazing. Now that this side of the model board window framework has had its matte black coating and it's dried, it's time to take these off, turn them over and replicate what we've just done to that side and allow that to dry. I've reapplied the new masking tape on the ends and turned the window frames over, ready for a coat of paint on this side. Done exactly the same for the 4 end pieces. So I'll take those down to the garage, give those a coat, let them dry, and then they'll be ready to add the glazing in between. So I've removed all the masking tape and you can see the parts that have been primed in grey. They come out nicely. So all that we need to do now is repeat it on the other sides and prime those bits. So I'm going to mask these big bits back up again, go back to the garage, paint the other side in grey, allow that to dry, then we'll bring it back indoors, allow it to dry for an hour or so, and then we can peel the masking tape off, and then we'll come back and see. And that's the other side masked up. Obviously I've taken off the base. I don't need to prime the underneath. You can if you want to, but I'm not going to bother. I'll paint that in a black acrylic later on. So it's just the roof cross members, the 2 side panels, end panels, and the dividing wall. And obviously because I'm using the bricks on this section, the other side hasn't, so all I've done is just allowed a 4mm gap, just so I know that when this is fitted to the inside of the skeleton frame that there'll be no MDF showing. So that's that. So I'm going to go down into the garage and prime those and then allow them to dry before we take all the masking tape back off and then start on the brickwork. So while I'm waiting for the other side of the grey primer to dry, I'm going to move on to the base. That's already dry, so we can now give this a concrete effect, something similar to that effect I'm going to try. And we've obviously got our dark grey base, so then we'll add 3 different layers using the sponging method, basically adding some paint to a bit of MDF, dabbing the sponge in, and then randomly pattern it all over the base, allow it to dry. So the first colour I'll use will be a slightly darker grey, which is a Citadel colour. It's Celestial Grey. I'll add that, allow that to dry, and then we'll add another Citadel colour, which is Ulthuan Grey. Allow that to dry, and then we'll finally finish off with a lighter colour, which is Deck Tan. If I still need to lighten it, I might use a slight yellow or a white just to give it a brighter colour as well, but we'll see how we go. I was quite pleased with how that came out, so that's what I'm going to aim for, so we'll do that next. That's the base done. Used the colours as suggested, and I also added a buff colour towards the end just to give it some slight sort of like creamy yellow, and some then just a plain white acrylic with some light highlights all over it just to tone it down as well, make it a little bit more lighter. I always find concrete extremely difficult to do because there's so many different variations, but that'll do nicely. All it really needs to do now is dry, and it really wants weathering, so like with a wash to really tone it down, but I'll allow this to dry fully. I might matte varnish it before I do any kind of wash, because obviously this is the base. I don't really want water, wash water penetrating into the MDF really, because it will start to warp. If I cover it in a matte varnish first, that might be the best option, but I could leave it like that and see how we go on. We'll see how time goes, but that's that done. I'm going to leave that to one side to dry, and we'll progress further with the remaining parts that have been primed. We'll take those off and we'll look at doing the brickwork. With the need to paint the doors, all I've done is masked up the areas I don't need to paint. Pointless painting this because it's going to be hidden by the brickwork, and I'm just going to give these doors a quick blast of a black primer. Might go over it with a black satin afterwards for the doors, and then allow that to dry, and then I can take it off, and then once this is all dry, then we can actually then start our framework. These two pieces don't have any doors on, so don't need to do anything with those. So I'm just going to go down to the garage and prime these. Now that we've done both sides of the grey framework and cross members and taken all the masking tape off, now we can go back to masking up again, but this time we're going to mask up the grey and leave all the brickwork available, and we're going to take this into the garage and we'll give that a coat of the red oxide primer as a base. You can then go to town and use all different browns, reds, you name it, to paint the bricks, and then you can do your mortar. I'll most probably have a go at doing some of that as well, but the first thing to do is to give your MDF brickwork its coat of red oxide primer as a base, and then go from there. So we'll mask up this side and we'll go into paint the bricks. Obviously the other side is blank apart from the side, the inner wall panel, which is bricked both sides if you go for the premium kit with the bricks internally. So obviously we will need to let that dry before we can come back and paint that one. So we'll get rid of the cross members, they're done. We can also, while we're doing the brickwork, is get the external brickwork for the outer building and give those a coat of red primer as well. I'm going to cover them all, then obviously we'll mask up eventually and just do the grey primer for the concrete lintel top, so we can do all the brickwork at the same time. So I'm going to mask that all up, take it to the garage and complete that. So I've returned from the garage. These are now dry, so I'm just going to take all the masking tape off, and it just remains to do the dividing wall, turn that over, mask that up and give that a coat of red primer. Here are most of the parts that have been primed, the brickwork in red. I'm just waiting for the dividing wall in the garage to dry. Just a little tip, obviously moving forward, obviously we've painted the framework grey and we've also painted the cross members grey. Now when you come to paint the cross members, it may be worth just masking up these end little noggins that slot into these sections here. If you paint them like I have, you may find that they don't fit because you've added that bit of paint inside the framework there and also on the cross member. So I'm going to need to just quickly sand a little bit off the edges, and I'm just going to run my sandpaper just down the groove just to make them fit. But for you, you might just want to add a bit of masking tape on the ends, which will save you sanding like I'm going to have to do. Irrespective of which kit you go for, premium or the standard, both will have the internal doors engraved into the MDF. So I need to mask these two pieces up around the doors, and then I'm just going to give these a matte black matching the outside as well, and then I'll come back and they will be ready for then mortaring or adding some different color paints. I'm not going to include that in this video, but hopefully I'll be able to show you what I've done once this is completed, and it's entirely up to you then what you do with your interior. But obviously the exterior brickwork needs to be painted and mortared, there's no choice about that, but we'll cover that in a later part of the video. So first of all, we'll mask this up and go and paint the doors black. I'm going to move on to just do the concrete lintel at the top of the brickwork and between the top frame. Although two pieces are in the cabin drying because obviously I painted the doors, I can put these on this piece of MDF. So I've just literally masked up at the top of the brick and at the bottom of the frame. Ideally you want Tamiya masking tape for this, because obviously it won't bleed the concrete through. I've got no Tamiya tape left, so I've got no choice. I want to crack on and get this done, so I'm going to take a chance and I'm just going to do a couple of light coats of concrete colour, and I'm going to be using this Rail Match 422 concrete, and see how we get on with that. It's quite a light looking colour, so I'm going to try that and see how we get on. So that's my next job, is to do those three pieces in the concrete colour. And whilst we're doing the inner bricks, if you're using the premium kit, I'm going to just quickly mask up the exterior brickwork and add the concrete colour to the top lintel as well. What I've done is I've quickly removed the masking tape and pulled it away from the paint. Actually, it's come out really well. I think there was just one panel where I've got a slight overlap of concrete paint, so I can get a tiny little brush with some red paint, blend that in with the bricks. But I've taken the top masking tape off, left the masking tape underneath, just so, because obviously we've done the edges on the tops, so I'll let that dry. I've just moved them so they don't stick to the masking tape. So I'm going to allow those to dry. I've got the window wide open because this paint stinks, and I've still got to go down to the cabin and get the other couple of bits that the doors were painted and do the concrete on those. So I'll also do exactly the same as what I've done there, so no need to show you, and then they will be ready for the colouring of the bricks and the mortar added at a later stage afterwards. I'm going to move on to sorting out the skeleton frame. Now, if you buy the premium kit with the laser engraved brickwork, I would strongly suggest that we do not glue your skeleton frame to the base, because you're most probably going to want to take it off to showcase stuff inside. There's no point having the brickwork otherwise. If you have the standard interior, then you can certainly glue it to the base, but as I've got the bricks, all I'm going to do is I'm going to fit it around, but I'm going to glue the skeleton frame together in each corner. I'll use some masking tape to keep in position, and I'll most probably use some offcuts of wood just to keep them in the ends to make sure they stay at 90 degrees while it dries. Obviously we still haven't done the glazing, but that's going to be our last part that we do, so we don't need to worry about that just yet. So we'll sort out the skeleton frame, we'll glue that around the outside, not to the base, and then once that's done we'll come back. There we have our skeleton frame. It's all in position. I've added some glue on the inner sides of the corners, added the masking tape on all corners just to keep it in position, and we'll allow that to dry for 5 or 10 minutes. We've used the deluxe material superphatic glue for that one, so we'll let that dry and then we'll come back. So I've allowed the skeleton frame to dry. I haven't removed the masking tape as yet because I'm going to be fitting the internal brickwork piece by piece, and I'm going to do the back panel first. Now you might find, if you've ordered this and you've painted it, that you now may have added some paint on the ends along with the top of the framework, and it doesn't fit quite inside here, so you may need just to lightly sand down the outsides, which I've done, and it fits in there nicely. It slots into the grooves. All I'm going to be doing is adding just a little bit of glue along here and fixing it to the back panel. I'll hold it there for a minute or so, and that's it. I'm not going to be gluing into the base, and I'm not going to be adding any glue to the top of the framework. So just a little bit on here, stick it in and glue it, and then we'll add this side, and then we'll add the side pieces. And again, you may need to sand slightly to get it to fit in, but it's worth testing first. So I'm going to be gluing that part, then I'll do this one on the two ends, and I'll come back and show you when that's done. When I'm adding the interior, I'm just putting it on its side. Be careful not to damage the framework, but a couple of bits of wood, blank MDF pieces, and just pushing it down literally all the way along to make sure that it fits snugly, because obviously we've got to be adding the side pieces. We may have to do a bit of sanding as well, but I want to make sure that these are as pushed in and against the edge of the skeleton framework as possible to allow ease of access for those side pieces. So we'll move on and do the side pieces, and I'll show you when they're done. Right, so all four sides are in, so we've just got to now add the internal piece. Remember, it will slot into the holes in the base, but we don't want to be gluing this because obviously we might want to take the framework apart. So the only part we're gluing is into the framework, into the little holes. So add a little bit of glue onto the ends, push it down in, and it should slot in and glue nicely. Hold it in position, and then obviously once that's done, we can then add the rest of the framework cross members as well. So we've completed the interior brickwork and we've added the cross members, so they're all in place, drying nicely. Once that's dried, which won't be too long, I can then add all the exterior brickwork. I'll add the front first, and then add a side, a rear, and then the side, and hopefully they'll all butt together nicely. You might find, because obviously the thickness of MDF, there may be some slight variations in the corners. There's nothing I can do about that, unless you want to have to sand the corners off to get them level. It's entirely up to you, but hopefully it will be as close as we can possibly do. So I'm going to be adding those next. When you come to fit your external brickwork, just take a little bit of time just to make sure that when you place the side brickwork, that the bricks butt in to the front ones nicely, that there's not too much space. Now unfortunately MDF has a tendency to be different thicknesses across a small area, and obviously this MDF brickwork is in 1.5 mil, and it can vary from about 1.45 to 1.7. Now if you get a bit at the end which is 1.7, your brickwork is going to be way out, and there's nothing that you or I can do about it. So I'm going to add a little bit of extra length to the end bricks. But what you might find is when you add them, one side may be great, the other side may not be. So it might be worth just sanding down the edges of the inner skeleton frame slightly. That's made of 2 mil, so you've got plenty of MDF there to sand, and then just try again. See if you can get them as flush as possible on the corners. You see they're not too bad. This corner's even better, but the other corner, this one here, sticks out a little bit. So I need to add, because obviously this is the pre-production model, so I'm going to add a little bit of extra length to those to make them just slightly bit easier for you to join. But it's just worth making sure that if they're not right, just sand down the edges of the skeleton frame at all corners, just to see if you can butt the bricks up together nicely. So that's just a quick small tip before you glue those together. Hopefully you've painted your window frames both sides. I've done mine in a matte black, so all I've done is just laid them out on the table, and obviously we've got the front window frame with the vents, the rear and the two sides, the front glazing and the side glazing. Now regarding the glazing, if you want to keep it with the backing on, you can do, and have it as an opaque. If you want to take the backing off, now there is backing on both sides, if you take it both off, it will become a clear window. So obviously if you're buying the kit with the internal brickwork, it makes sense to have the clear glazing so you can see what's inside, and obviously if you decide to put a load of stuff in there, you'll be able to see it as well. If you're buying the one without the internal brickwork, then you might want to keep the backing on and have it as an opaque effect. So next thing we need to do is to glue these together. All we need to do is add some glue, and I'm going to be using the Deluxe Materials Glue and Glaze because it dries clear, and I'm going to use cocktail stick and use the dabbing method to go around the outside of the frame. I'll also then most probably do alternate window lines just so you can keep it on, and then make sure you've got somewhere to hand where you've got a ridge, because obviously then what you can do is you can hold one part up with the glue on and hold it against the edge of that ridge so you know it's not going anywhere, and then with the other hand bring up your glazing and put it to the left and bring it up to the window frame, and you know it's then level at the bottom, and hopefully you can just move it over and it will attach to the framework nicely. Once you've done that, put it down on the ground against the flat piece, and then obviously just find a spare piece of wood or anything flat, a ruler or anything, and just go on the top and push it down to make sure that the glue's adhering to the glazing. Obviously I haven't glued it yet, but I'm just showing you the effect. Once that's done, then obviously then you can do that, turn it over with the glazing on. So effectively, if I put that on here, you've got that, let's say that's your glazing and it's done. glue this second part doing the dabbing method as well, turn it over and then add it on top again, doing the side method. So I'm making a cock up at this because I'm holding the camera, unfortunately. So you end up with something like that, and it will hopefully then use your fingers to run up the framework and keep and hold it in position, and you should then find that your glazing fits nice and flush in between your framework. I'll do it and I'll show you once I've done one, but I'm going to be peeling off my backing because this is going on a demo with internal bricks, so I'll do that and come back and show you. And there we have our framework with the glazing installed. If you get any excess glue coming out, obviously just get your cocktail stick and just go down the sides and just wipe any off. You're going to see a little bit of glue, but hopefully when it dries it would be okay. And obviously make sure, as you can see, the top part of the framework is a lot thicker than the bottom part of the framework. You need to make sure that both sides are exactly the same. You don't want one thick side and one thin side alternating, so you want to make sure you get that correct as well. That's done, so we need to just replicate that with the other side panel and the fronts and the rears. So I'll do those and come back and show you when they're done. Right, so that's those four done. All the glazing are in. If I hold it up, you can see the reflection. I've gone round any of the framework with a cocktail stick just to remove any unsightly glue marks. If you put the least you put on there, the better. I'm going to allow those just to dry for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then they'll be ready for gluing onto the framework of the actual building. If when you come to fit your framework, they need to be flush both ends. If you find that you haven't quite got these level at the end and one of them's protruding out, or it's just a slightly bit too long, just use a little bit of fine sandpaper and sand the ends down just slightly. We will be covering it with a silver foil to ready to paint once it's done. And then obviously just make sure, because obviously these side windows will be protruding out slightly, so your main windows will fit flush up against them. So just double check before you glue it on that these don't protrude out anymore, because you haven't quite got them square. I've simply used the dabbing method with the cocktail stick to go all the way around the outside of the framework. I'm not putting any glue on the internal braces, because when we fit it up you'll find that they do not apply fixed to any of those frames. So it's literally gluing around the outside, the perimeter of the framework on either side, butt it up against it and hold it there in position for a minute or so, and then continue and do the sides and then the front, and then you'll have that done. I'll come back and show you when I've done those. We have the edging strips that will go around the top of your brickwork once you put your windows in, but obviously we need to paint these concrete colour, so I'll be matching the colour that I did on the top of the brickwork, concrete plinth. So I'll paint those, allow those to dry. We also need to finish off the windows, so we'll come back and do those once I've painted these. The lintels have been painted and they're dried, and we now need to fit those on top of the brickwork. The colour obviously matches. You need to fit the end small pieces first. They should be exactly the same width as the window frames, and then the front and rear parts are slightly longer, so you will need to trim these. I've made them longer purely because, again, I don't know how much glue you're going to use and if it fits properly, so it's just better to fit it and let it dry and then trim the end piece off using a very sharp knife, a ZP blade, whatever you use. So I'm going to be gluing these two pieces on, allow those to dry. I'll then glue these pieces on, let them protrude at one end, and then what I'll do is I'll probably be able to then add it to the side of this piece here and just trim it off nicely. And then obviously you'll need to just maybe touch up the end piece of your lintel just to match the colour. So I'm going to do that. We only need to glue on the underside of this and then put it up against it. There's not a lot, I think it's about 2.5 mil of space there, so there's not a lot of room, and you might need to use your spare piece of wood just to hold it on while it dries, because obviously you don't want it tilting. So we'll do that and we'll come back when that's done. And there we have the lintels on top of the concrete, and they've been cut to make sure they all match at the ends. So that's now done, and we can move on to the next part. We move on to the door top lintels. There's 3, and they will go on the 2 front doors, ignoring that one that didn't have one, and then the side door on the right hand side. So I'm going to take those out. They are just held on in the middle, so you need to get your blade and just quickly tap them out, and then I'm going to paint them and in the same color as that concrete and the ledge, fit them, and then that will be it, apart from finishing off the roof, which we will sort out afterwards. So that's the door lintels in place. And then also what I've done is created a little template of door frames that can go around all the 4 doors, even the large one. They are held in slightly very tiny little tag, so you just need to get your zippy blade and just take them out, and then obviously then paint them and then fit them accordingly. That should help hopefully round off those doors quite nicely. I decided just to paint my door frames in the same colour, black, just as I had some black matte spray paint to hand. I've taken them off the double-sided Tamiya tape, and all I'm going to do now is just do a bit of dabbing glue like I did with the window frames around the outside, stick them onto the door, use cocktail stick to remove any excess glue, and just move them into the correct position, and then allow them to dry, and that'll be those that are done. Then we'll move on to the next part. That's the glazing all round. Allow that to dry, so we need to move on and complete the roof. So obviously we've got the roof panel here. You need to prime both sides, because obviously unless you're not going for the one that you can see inside, then you don't really need to prime inside, but it makes sense to do both, to be honest. A light grey primer, and then the colour of your choice for the roof. I'm going to most probably paint it black and then add some shingle or some kind of stuff on top, and obviously then it'll glue on top. So, and then once that's done, there will be a silver strip that you can use to then just go over the edges as a roof edge strip, and also on the corners of the window frames, because nobody's going to get this exactly the same as everybody else, because obviously we don't know how much glue you're going to use. But we'll give you a silver strip. It's very thin. It's an adhesive strip, so you can peel it off and then just tack it on the sides. Use your fingers or a piece of MDF just to tack it against the side, and then obviously then you can hand paint it, and that will cover up any unsightly gaps you might have in the corners. So I'm going to go into the garage and prime the roof top and bottom, and then I will most probably leave the underneath grey, and then I'm going to paint the top black. Then we'll come back and fit that. So I've added the frames around the doors, not that you can see them because they're black, and we move on to our last part, which is the roof. Now obviously I've already primed the roof internally. I've done grey, and obviously for the top I've done black. Now I will be adding most probably some scenic material on top, and also we've got some foil to go around the outside, but this is now ready to glue on. So what you can do is obviously add the glue around the perimeter of the framework, and then literally put it on top, put it in position, use your fingers to align it up. It should match all the way around. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't quite match, because we are going to put a strip all the way around the edge to cover the joins. So I'm going to glue that in place, allow that to dry, and then we'll come back and do the trimming around the outside and then down the sides of the window frames. For those of you who have bought the internal brickwork, so you can see internally with obviously the clear glazing, before gluing on your roof, I would advise you to remove your base, because obviously once you put your glue on, you can't get access to your base. There's nothing underneath to remove that unless you've glued your base to your baseboard or whatever. But obviously when you build a kit, it's unlikely to be doing that. So be careful when you remove your base, because obviously you've got your cross members. Be careful when you do that. Take your base off, and then obviously then you can glue your frame on. You've got your skeleton frame and your outer brickwork, so it's not going to go anywhere. Glue your roof on. When you're happy, obviously then you can do all your internal bits, and then obviously you can slot that back onto your base. So we'll glue that on top, and once that's done, we'll add the strips to the outer perimeter. In your kit, you will receive this strip of aluminium, and it has an adhesive backing, so you can peel the backing off. But however, before you do that, you need to cut this into strips to go around the edges of your roof on the front and sides, and then also on the corners of your window frames. I would suggest that you make them around 4 to 5 mil wide strips. You've got a 2 mil width of your top of your window frame, so you could have 2 mil here, 2 mil there, make it 4 mil. And I think on the side of the window frames it's a little bit wider, but I'm going to most probably cut these into 4 mil strips. Just going to use a little ruler and add a line, and then cut it with a blade, sharp blade. You need to be really careful on how you cut this. You might even want to just draw a pen line and cut it with scissors, but you've got to be very careful. So cut these into some strips. I'll do that and I'll come back and show you. Okay, so I've cut 4 strips ready to do the sides and the edges. Obviously you've got plenty left over, so if you do muck up, you most probably got enough to do it all over again. But obviously we need the length, and that's the thickness it comes in, so put that to one side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel off the backing of this, and then what I'll most probably do is I'll line it up with the outer edge of the window frame, and then I'll fold it over and most probably use a small piece of MDF or something just to give it hopefully a nice edge. And I'll do the main front and then the back first, and then follow on by the sides, and then do down on the window frames. So I'll have a go at doing that, and then I'll come back and show you when I've done that. Now before I move on to doing the other sides, I just thought quickly, so now I cut my strips at 4 mil. So I reckon you might be able to get away with doing 5 mil, because if you look, I've done the edges. Obviously you've got your 2 mil of your window frame, then obviously you've got your height of your roof, which is 3 mil. So, and then obviously then it goes over by 1 mil. So if I lean over, you'll see the strip just goes over the edge of the roof slightly by 1 mil, but I reckon you could most probably get away with 2 mil by the time you've covered your roof on and painted it. So it's entirely up to you, but there you go. I thought I'd quickly show you that. That's a 4 mil strip, and obviously this will need painting, and I'll just paint it in black to blend it in, and it gives you a nice cover over the gaps and the joins. And if you looked at the real thing, it looks as though there was some kind of edging strip of some kind added on, but this silver foil works really well. Just be careful how you do it. And I peeled it off and just gradually worked my way along, trying to align it up level. Don't peel the whole of the backing off, because it will just suddenly curl up into a spiral and you'll end up breaking it. So just take it off a little bit at a time when you go along, and you should be able to do it. Okay, so I'm going to do the other 3 sides and the sides of the windows, come back and show you when it's finished. And that's all the aluminium strips all done. That's all been added to the sides, down the edges of the window framework, and all that needs to be done is for that to be painted. Now I will be painting it black, basically, because obviously I've got black window frames and black roofs, so it makes sense to paint it black. I'm going to use an acrylic black. You might need a couple of coats on this aluminium foil, and obviously be careful when you're painting this bit along your window frames that you don't get it all on the glazing. Once I've done that and let it dry, then we can add some shingles or whatever we're going to put on the top. So, but that's all done. Happy with that. So we will then paint that, and I'll come back and show you when it's done. So we've completed fitting the aluminium strip. We gave it a light coat of black acrylic paint first, just to go over the aluminium. Doesn't take to it great to start off with, but if you build it up in a couple of layers, 2 or 3 layers, then it's fine. As you can see, it's now coated nicely. I've also gone around the outsides of the windows, so you've got no joins showing whatsoever. So all that leaves to be remain to do is to add your shingle to the top of your roof, glue it on, spray it, paint it, do whatever you want. I'm going to find what I've got available and have a go at doing what I've got. I think I've got some fine sort of like grit effect, black grit, so I'm going to probably find that in the cupboard and put it on, and I'll show you when it's finished. Right, this is I've got a silicon carbide powder, which is a very fine granite powder, and it looks like that. So I've just tipped it on there just to show you. Obviously it's in grey in colour, so what I'll do is most probably just liberally add some glue all over the roof and then shake this over and allow it to adhere to the glue, remove any excess, and then allow that to dry, and then I'll most probably go over in a dark grey black paint. We'll see how it dries, but that's what I'm going to use. So we'll give it a try and see what happens. So there's my roof with a thin coat of PVA, and all I'm going to do now is add that silicon carbide and shake off any excess, allow it to dry, and then paint it. But I'll come back and show you before we paint it to show you what it looks like. And there we have the completed boiler house stroke stores room. I used this on the roof, silicon carbide, which is a grey sort of like material, and then I've just gone over with some black paint. It's left it sort of like a little bit blotchy, so it could look as though it's like a worn roof. Would I recommend it? Most probably not, to be honest. Most probably a fine grit sandpaper would most probably suffice as well. There's one that I did obviously without any painting, and that shows you the opaque windows. So if you go for the standard inside, that's most probably the windows that you'll do. So that completes the build, and hopefully that has given you an insight into how to do it. Any questions or queries, you know where you can get hold of me, on Facebook Messenger, or on the product support page, or the contact page on the website. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.